Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar today. My name is Morgan Lee, and I'm a part of the business development team here at Tax 990. We are an IRS authorized e-file provider that allows nonprofits to easily and securely file their Form 990 returns online. Our platform is designed to simplify the filing process, save organizations time, and help them stay compliant with IRS requirements. Today, we're excited to continue a series with the second session, using Form 990 as a strategic fundraising and PR tool. This is designed to help nonprofits optimize key sections of the Form 990 to build trust and support year-round fundraising and communication efforts. I'm excited to welcome back Melissa Leroy. She holds a degree in entrepreneurship and nonprofit management from Duke University. She teaches nonprofit management classes and consults through her firm, On Fire Nonprofit Consulting. Welcome back, Melissa.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here with all of you again today. So we're going to go ahead and get started because this hour is jam-packed for all of you attending, and we're coming back from last week's part one. So real briefly, everyone, I want to maximize the amount of time and be a good steward of your time today. I'm just going to kind of go through basically some of the things that we talked about last week in case we have anybody joining us for the first time this week. Maybe you weren't able to join for part one. So some of the things that we really talked about was the 5 different filings of the 990 that nonprofit organizations have to file in this country. If you do not file a 990 for 3 consecutive years, you are automatically dissolved by the IRS. So we talked about that. We talked about the revocation letter that nonprofit organizations get. This is your responsibility. So if you're here as a nonprofit leader, you partner with your board of directors, who is the governing body of a nonprofit organization, to make sure that your 990 is filed on time and or that you file that free 3-month up to 6-month extension with the IRS before the 990 is actually due. We also talked about some of the things in terms of the 990, the transparency, making sure, right, that we truly are open to public inspection. We want to make sure that we really deliver that impact. So a lot of times you get the question of, great, you need $50,000. What is going to be that return on investment? If I give you the $50,000, what is that return on investment, and what is the impact that that is going to have on your nonprofit organization? So we'll look at these specific sections today when I bring up the 990 from the case study that we looked at last week. And then also the accountability. So we know that we're held accountable to state and federal regulators and also to the general public as well, even if the general public is not a donor of our organization. Again, I emphasized this last week, that once you receive your IRS determination letter, you are now owned by the public. So we took a look at the case study of Dream out of Harlem, New York. And the reason why I use this as a case study is their impact, what I like to call their impact report, they call their annual report, really demonstrates Melissa's 5 essential elements of a great annual report. So once again here, it really focuses on the impact, the accomplishments of all of their 4 pillars of activities. So if you're joining us this afternoon, you weren't able to see that as we kind of scrolled through this, the URL link for that is 2020wearedream.org. So a very short, easy to remember link for that annual report if you wanted to go off and take a look at that after today's presentation. And then we also saw 3 different types of storytelling within their annual report. They always like to embed a video. There's also audio stories and then visual stories that you can read as well. And we also talked about the financials, how really important the financials are. And a lot of times in annual reports, I see where nonprofit organizations simply screenshot a 990 section, or they screenshot the audited financial statements, and or they just screenshot a spreadsheet. And so I kind of made the joke jokingly, however, I'm very serious about this, everybody, is I'm probably one of the few people that you'll ever meet that if I get an email and attached as an Excel spreadsheet, I get very excited. I do love spreadsheets. Most people are not that way. They're very visual learners, and we need to incorporate color. And that's exactly what Dream did in this annual report. It was a beautiful, right, pie chart, if you remember, with the financials, a 5-year projected plan for the organization. And then last but not least, they had a lot of different calls to action there. Donate, enroll your child, volunteer with us, become a staff person, and then sign up for our newsletter. So multiple calls to action. So I'm really emphasizing this slide again today because I want you to think about that when we get to the Form 990, their Form 990, that we're going to take a look at, because I'm going to pull out specific segments of that and reference back to the annual report and reference back to this slide of Melissa's 5 essential elements as well. So that's really what we need to do, is we need to embed and incorporate some of those components of our annual report and our impact report. Because everyone, here's the reality of the situation, is that we spend a lot of time on our annual report and our impact report. However, the only place that you can pull off our annual report or impact report is typically our own website. So right now we have 3 major websites that you can go off and pull off our 990. And with Charity Navigator, which is the largest watchdog group of nonprofit organizations, and others really driving the bus right now in terms of donor checklist, funder checklist. Hey, go off and pull off their 990 before contributing, or before contributing another dollar to an organization that you have already given money to. So then taking pieces and parts of our annual report and our impact report and really making sure that we showcase this in the 990, because that's where donors are going first. They're not going to your website. They're going to Charity Navigator, pulling off this checklist. They're going to the 990. Then eventually they will end up at your website. So making sure that we incorporate that. So I want to real briefly here take a look at their audited financial statements as well. And I'll do this, but I'm going to talk about it first. So because they are such a large nonprofit organization and they have a lot of funders that require audited financial statements, we'll take a look at their audited financial statements as well. The one thing that I really want to emphasize here, everyone, is with an audited financial statement, if you are receiving state appropriation dollars and or federal grant funding, know the rules around the uniform guidance. Also on that monetary threshold as to when you have to have an audit, that's $1 million currently right now in this country. We do know that the uniform guidance is also under revision right now with our federal legislators. We haven't seen anything come of that quite yet. However, with other funders, make sure to read through those contracts. So if they require a certified financial review, which is a step down from an audit, and or if they require an audit as well. So know those rules. The one thing I want to stress here is that your audited financial statements have to reconcile back to your 990. And many of you heard me say this last week. For those of you joining us this week, I'll say it again. I have been looking at and proofing 990s since the 90s and audited financial statements, and rarely do I see the two actually reconcile with the same numbers. So if they do not reconcile, let's say the auditors went into a little bit more depth and found that some things were classified wrong and they had to fix this, they had to move money maybe from programs to management general and or fundraising. This needs to be listed on Schedule D as in dog on your 990, to where somehow then the audited financial statements and the 990 actually reconcile back together. So if someone's looking at this particular funder, and we hear this a lot with foundations today, they are the ones that are catching a lot of the mistakes on 990s and audited financial statements. However, the ultimate responsibility lies with the board of directors in terms of making sure that they review both documents before they sign off on the audited financials and or certified financial review, and or if you're just having a compilation and or the 990. So the main difference between the 990 and the audited financial statements, of course, the audited financial statements is more assurance. So they're going to get into a lot more transactions and it's a lot more work than the 990, obviously. So you'll see a little bit of different order for the financials in the audited financial statements. I'm just going to focus on the functional classification or the functional expenses, what we typically in the nonprofit sector and space call cost-centered accounting and or cost allocation. But again, here, I just want to make sure that when we pull up that audit I'll talk about, you have to be able to reconcile any differences and all differences between the audited financial statements and the 990. And a lot of times I see that there are so many variations and so many differences there. I also wanted to, before I jump right into the 990, because that's where I'm going to spend the majority of my time with all of you this afternoon, wanted to reference back to last week. So we had a question, and I'm not sure that I fully answered that question, and I just wanted to kind of revisit that. So we had a participant that was asking about Charity Navigator and who gets on Charity Navigator, et cetera. And my whole purpose in saying this is donors really can't and they don't distinguish between if you're a 501c3, 4, 6, 17, 19, whatever the case may be. All they hear is nonprofit. So what they are referencing back to are the Charity Navigator webinars, educational resources such as articles on their website, and those donor checklists. So a lot of the parts and pages and schedules within the 990 that we're going to look at today, this comes directly from a lot of the donor checklist and then educational articles that have been widely publicized by Charity Navigator and very similar charity watchdog groups all across the globe. So the main 990 points that or parts that I want to really focus on is going to be part one. We're going to take a look at, this is a summary of the 990. We're going to take a look at specific things such as employees, such as volunteers, number of volunteers that you have, number of governing board members. In part two, page 2, part 3 on the long form, everybody, this is going to be one of the most important sections of the 990. Here's where you lure people in. So this is called the Statement of Program Service Accomplishments, or what I like to call your impact for the organization. We're then going to take a look at, real briefly, part 5 here, and then part 6. So this gets into the IRS compliance, and then also it gets into our governance. Here, these main pages is where foundations and donors and even corporate sponsors, these help them to discern whether your nonprofit organization is a well-governed organization or not. So we'll take a look at those sections. And I actually have 3 different organizations that we're going to look at. First, we'll look at DREAM, and then we're going to look at an organization that I think really showcases this very well. And then we'll take a look at a 990 EZ filing as well. Some of the same parts, different, obviously, from the 990 and the 990 EZ. 990 has more, right, detail than the EZ. However, the 990 EZ does have part 3 on page 2, and we'll take a look at that as well today during our time. Then when we get to part 9 on page 10, this is probably one of the most important parts of the 990, line 25. So if some of you brought a 990 with you, if you're joining and you have another tab pulled up, if you didn't, go out to Charity Navigator, find a nonprofit organization that you've donated to or have heard about lately. Maybe they've been doing a great marketing and advertising campaign in your area, and pull off a 990. Or if you have your own, if you're here representing a nonprofit organization, pull that up, because as soon as we pull up the 990, it's my hope and my intention that you can follow right along with me today. So when we get to page 10, this is the Statement of Functional Expenses. So the same page that we're going to look at on the audited financial statements, we're going to look at on the 990 as well. And so here's where Charity Navigator back in the mid to late 90s came up with what is now known as the general key ratios. So many of you, you may not know it by that term. You probably know it because you've been asked and or someone's questioned you about, if I give you $1, what percentage of my dollar actually goes to programs versus management in general, which we typically call admin in the nonprofit sector and space, and or fundraising. So I'm going to kind of give you the accepted, right, percentages according to Charity Navigator. So within the program, it's 65 to 75% of the dollar percentage and or cents of the dollar. And then for management in general, it's 10 to 20, and fundraising is 25 to 35. So you see we've got a little wiggle room between those three basic expense categories within the nonprofit sector. Charity Navigator and the donor checklist, what they do is they actually send individuals and foundations to page 10 and calculate line 25. And it's very simple math because column A, you've got all of the total expenses, and then B is program, C is management general, and D. So it's a simple math of just dividing programs into the total to get that percentage. And we'll take a look at that as well when we get to that point on the 990. The two schedules on this slide, but the three schedules that I'm going to be mentioning today exclusively, we're going to take a look at Schedule A. This has to deal with the 33 1/3% public support test. So if many of you recall, if you were here with us last week, we had some individuals on the presentation that had private nonprofit organizations. So we have to, in order to stay a public charity, we have to ensure that we have 33 1/3% public support test. And that's really what Schedule A is about. And then Schedule B. This one, I cannot emphasize enough, everyone, is not open to public inspection. So, and the reason for that is donor records. So that is why you are issued, right, that public disclosure copy. So make sure that you do not release Schedule B with the names and addresses of the individuals attached to that. That is why there is a public disclosure copy. And we'll take a look at the public disclosure copies as well. So the 990 Easy and the long form 990 have a lot of schedules. And you'll have a page of checklist of schedules where you read these questions. If you check yes, that's a schedule that you have to attach to the 990 Easy and or the long form 990 filing for your nonprofit organization. The one schedule that Charity Navigator and a lot of the watchdog groups will send people to verify is there, number one, and number two, verify that you have answered all the questions is Schedule O. And I love Schedule O, everyone, because here's where we get to have a little bit of creativity with our organization, and we get to incorporate more about our organization. So utilizing this space as exactly that, kind of our marketing and fundraising tool as well. So hopefully we've done this throughout the entire 990, but we're really going to close it, right, and seal the deal on Schedule O. So we'll take a look at some really, really good examples of that as we look at the samples that we have today. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at the audited financial statements. And I'm going to bring my screen up here with me. So bear with me just a second, everyone. Takes us just a minute to get this going. Okay, fantastic. All right, I'm hopeful that everybody can see this. It looks like it's live. So here we go. All right. So let me make this just a little bigger because that screen looks a little small, everybody here. Okay. All right, so for the audited financial statements, right, just a couple of things. I'm really going to only focus on one page here. But you can kind of see the table of contents. You can see that we've got the statement of financial position, otherwise known as our balance sheet, our statement of activities, otherwise known as our profit and loss statement, and then the statement of functional expenses here as well. And so that's the page that we're going to take a look at real quickly here. The other thing is if you have a full audit, of course, you're going to have an auditor's opinion. Make sure that you are comfortable and that you know all of the different levels of an opinion. There's 5 different opinions that can be awarded for a nonprofit organization. So whether this is a modified or unmodified opinion, know what is a clean audit and what is not a clean audit. If that auditor and or CPA had any issues or troubles working with management, getting documentation, whatever the case may be, because I see a lot of nonprofit organizations, they just accept the audit, and then when a funder asks them about the opinion, they have no idea how to answer that. So really work with your auditors and CPAs. So right here is the page that we're going to look at. So this is our statement of functional expenses, and you can see here how it's broken down into program services, management, general, and fundraising. So working off of the Charity Navigator general key ratios of those percentages that I gave you. And commonly, this is what you will see is management, general, and fundraising are under the support services. So when we scroll down here, you could also easily do the math here as well. So we've got our total expenses over here all the way onto the right-hand side. You could easily divide then the program expenses of 24 million. Sorry, 24,086,318 into the 31 to get your percentage. And you want to make sure that these line up, everybody, with then the 990. And if they do not, it's very important that Schedule D of the 990 is filled out. And then I always take it a step further, and we're going to put a comment on Schedule O to call this out, basically call out that elephant in the room. We realize this, it was our mistake. We just didn't read the contract correctly, maybe with funding for a grant. We were only allowed 10% of administrative expenses versus 15, which is in accordance to the uniform guidance. Whatever the case may be as to why that reclassification or reallocation happened in the first place, we want to make sure that there's a footnote on Schedule O of that 990, that if you look at our audited financial statements, our certified financial review, these numbers are not going to equal what is currently on the 990. So you can already guess why I'm saying this is because it doesn't, right, on the 990. And then so the audited financial statements, you can see here, this is a 20-page document, and the longest section of that is the footnotes section. So if there's footnotes on the audit, is it applicable to then put those footnotes on the Schedule O for the 990? So taking a look at that as well, because the footnote section, some of them are mandated and required by GAAP, General Accepted Accounting Principles. However, you'll see some footnotes, though, in your audited financial statement or your certified financial review that are specific to your nonprofit organization. So be mindful of that as well and taking a look at that. All right, so let's take a look at then, everybody, those main sections then of a 990. So here's DREAM. So our case study that we looked at for their annual report, that stellar annual report last week, a little too large there. There we go. All right, so page 1, this is a summary of your nonprofit organization. So you can kind of see here, we kind of go through the tax year. Make sure that all of your information is correct here, everybody. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've seen a 990 with an incorrect phone number. Nobody knows whose phone number that is. Turns out it was an ex-employee that their number has been on there for years. You would be amazed, again, like I said last week, how many times 990s are downloaded off of Charity Navigator and Candid.org, and then how many times people call the phone number for additional information. One client that I was reviewing a 990, we did just that. I knew that wasn't the phone number, called, it was an ex-employee, and said, is there any way that you can correct this? I cannot begin to tell you how many phone calls I get about this organization, and I'm no longer there. So be mindful of that, everyone, and particularly also with your website. I see a lot of .coms when it's .org. So page 1 is a summary, as you can see here in part 1. So our activities, our governance of the organization. I just want to point out number of employees, 522, and number of volunteers. That will come more important as we get to Schedule O in just a little bit. And then the revenue section. So you can already see, right, where they're pulling in contributions and grants. This is going to be part 9, line 1H. So this is going to be page 9, the statement of revenue for the nonprofit organization. And then also additional footnotes that I like is here. So a lot of times this is a red flag. Why is there a negative in revenue? You could have a negative here if you lost on a specific investment, such as dividends, anything like that. I always like to put on Schedule O a footnote there so people don't have to go back and, if it's a prior year, they don't have to go back to Candid. They don't have to go back to Charity Navigator and pull that off. And then also, I've been an advocate of this. even with the 2008 redesign, some softwares did this. We really need to get to the point to where we can compare years here instead of having this grayed out. I always like to put on Schedule O then the prior fundraising. So we have a comparison here. So we'll bring this 3 million forward and put prior year. So that would have been 2022. And then just a snapshot, right? A snippet here of our net assets and or fund balances for the organization. All right, so one of the most important pages here, everybody, page 2, part 3. This is the impact. This is where we tout what we do as a nonprofit organization. We do great work. We know this. This is where we need to showcase this. And so as you recall, as we were going through their annual report, they had 4 pillars, and it was so impressive. You remember they were comparing their charter schools with New York State schools in the comparison. They were talking about the behavioral changes. They were talking about how many children they served. So if we look here, we want to definitely make sure that our mission statement is correct. Our mission statement is our brand. So this needs to be the statement that's on all of our marketing and advertising. This is on our website. So it needs to be the same one here. And too many times I see the mission statement on the 990 not the same as on the website. And when that's kind of called out, they're like, oh, that's like that mission statement's 7 years old. Okay. Again, this is no longer just a tax document. This is a marketing, PR, and fundraising tool for your organization. So we've got to pay attention to this. So even if you don't have the 990I instructions for the long form memorized like myself, luckily on this page, here's a little snippet of the actual instructions here. So it says in 4, describe the organization's program service accomplishments for 3 of its largest program services. Well, remember when we looked at, again, the annual report, impact report, they had 4 major areas. So here, what we should have filled out was 4A, 4B, 4C, and 4D. And 4D is going to be continued on Schedule O. So everybody with Tax 990 here, you have 9,000 characters. That's a lot. That is a lot to really put a solid impact in this space. And we're going to take a look at in just a second an organization that I think really did this very, very well. So the interesting thing about this, and you can go on their website, wearedream.org, you can pull off past 990s, their audited financial statements. I love that about them. Very, very transparent. This is one of the couple of things that I would change with this 990 is that we need to be more specific here with 4A, 4B, and 4C. This paragraph, unfortunately, has not changed in probably the last 6 years that I've used them as a case study. The only thing that has changed is the number here highlighted. So we could do so much better at showcasing those 4 individual pillars, just like they do in the annual report and the impact report of that organization. So let's take a look at then an organization in their part 3 on page 2 here. Let me see if I can get this one more, just a little bigger for the screen here for us. So what they've done here is I think they've showcased their programs so beautifully here. So with 4A, this is the 2024 food distribution. And you see what they do here is in 2024, the Henry County Food Pantry, right? We made a difference in fighting against hunger. They break this down. We provided nourishing food to 33,288 individuals, including 10,388 children, 16,226 adults, and 6,631 seniors. Impactful. So you know what they're doing when we award that grant, when we give them our hard-earned money to this organization. And then in addition, in 2024, they opened a clothes closet. So now they're serving right within their mission a different program and project. And so here again, you can see here distributing 66,558 items of clothing, hygiene, and household essential items. And then in 4C, I love this because they know Charity Navigator and the Charity Watchdog groups, and they know that funders are looking at this page. And they're like, can we add on, right? In 4C, we don't have a third program yet. However, we know that donors and funders are looking at this. So can we add in 4C here? And they certainly did. So you can see here, donors and potential donors. So kind of they're calling their attention, right? So they're kind of calling them out. We know that you're looking at this. We want to let you know that when you invest in us and donate, over 70% of the clients that we serve only requested our services or assistance once or three times in a year or less. And then we get into some more statistics here as well. So I think a beautiful job here, right, for the impact. So for those of you that are joining us and you are doing a 990 easy and you're like, okay, Melissa, we hear what you're saying. We don't have that kind of a room and or space. That is true. With a 990 easy filing, it is a little, right, less characters. But I love here what this organization has done, Despierta. And so they have taken their 3 major programs and they have really reduced this. So here's the program, total served over 600. And then they've intentionally put, please see Schedule O for additional impact, right? The same thing with, right, their other 2 programs as well. So you have the program name, and then we served, it's kind of a little teaser here because we know that donors and funders are heavily looking at this page. And this is what I call the make or break situation right here, is page 2, part 3 for most funders and most donors of an organization. So then when we get into, and I'm going to kind of skip through everybody, page 3 and 4, those are the checklist of required schedules. Make sure that you're comfortable with those. The number 1 schedule that I see missed there is Schedule G, which has to deal with fundraising for a nonprofit organization. If you receive more than $15,000, let's say in a special event, then you have to utilize Schedule G, as in giraffe. So make sure that you read through those checklist of schedules and that each schedule is filled out appropriately for your organization. When we get to page 6 here, I want to kind of just point out, we need to make sure, of course, that the governing body members are correct. That is going to, it's a formula. Now that we have electronic software, it's so much easier. It just bounces back or is forwarded over to page 1, that summary on page 1, making sure that that is correct for your organization. The other thing that I want to point out here is many organizations do not know. Here in section A, question 4, did the organization make significant changes to its governing documents? On the 990I instructions, it refers to articles of incorporation and bylaws. So currently right now, all we have to do is submit a summary of those changes, either to the articles and or bylaws on Schedule O. Make sure you're aware of that, everyone, because I have a lot of nonprofit organizations that, again, do not go through the 990 like they're supposed to. Section B, everybody, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit last week. I'll get really heavily into it. I mentioned page 6, section B, question 11A. Has the organization provided a copy of the 990 before it's filing to your governing body, meaning your board of directors? Everybody, and this is going to sound harsh, however, this is the truth and reality. This is probably one of the number 1 most falsified questions on a federal document that exists today in this country. I do not feel that we are adhering to this and that this is being answered honestly and correctly. So this is checked yes. Make sure that you have some method internally for your organization to track this. Make sure that the board actually looks at this. Again, I've been proofing 990s for so long. It's rare that I find a 990 without a mistake. Most of the time I find so many mistakes that I recommended that the 990 be amended. And I truly believe if the board and the C-suite nonprofit staff really reviewed the 990 as they should, we would be able to catch some of these mistakes before it is filed. So therefore, I want to back up just a step and go back to page 2, part 3, and state that the CPA is not responsible for this. The CMA, your accountant, whomever is filing the 990, you need to partner with them because they're not in your business every single day. So they do not know the impact of your programs, projects, services, and activities. You have to help them with this wording for that specific, and then help them with this as well. So this is part of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. that was enacted by the Financial Accounting Standards Board after the whole Enron situation happened in corporate America. So this gets into our conflict of interest policy, whistleblower policy, record and retention policy, even executive team compensation policy as well. Everybody know the rules around this. Many foundations now are asking to see these policies. So if you're checking yes on the 990, we need to have that policy in place as well. The next page that we're going to look at that a lot of funders and individual donors are looking at is our structure. So who are our C-suite employees, such as our executive director, our CEO, our COO, our CFO, and then who are our board members? And so making sure that this is filled out properly, average hours worked, and then also the average hours of your board. So I'm going to scroll through here and you will see that they have, I think in this one, 30 board of trustees, board of directors, and all of them are working 2 hours. I'm going to tell everybody listening to this, no one's buying this. It's not true. So we all know that we have board members who show up, they're there at the events before we even get there, they're hands-on, they love us. They're rolling up their sleeves, and then we have other board members who we struggle to even get emails returned. So again, making sure that we're filling out this 990 honestly and ethically and transparently to ensure. So if there's a board member, that is not showing up, even if we have to put 0.01 here, right, per week, that's what we're going to have to do, because funders and donors are looking at this and it's becoming heavily scrutinized. So we can no longer just do 1 down this column, 2 down this column, etc. So when you take a look at, other nonprofit organizations here, and let me see if I can get to this page real quickly. And I think this one's a little off. It is. When we look at this, right, fine. If they're only working, right, half an hour or volunteering half an hour for the organization, fantastic. That's what we're putting there. We're not putting, right, all the way down 3s or all the way down 2s, whatever the case may be for the organization. And so then the next page is going to be the statement of functional activities or functional expenses for the organization. So remember, we just looked at this page on the audited financial statements. So if any of you kind of jotted down those numbers, you're going to see down below that they do not reconcile. And even while they have filled out Schedule D, there's still a little bit of a disconnect here. And I'm not sure why that is, but unfortunately, again, I see this time and time again. So this breaks down the columns again in the 3 basic expense categories of the nonprofit. So if you're not familiar with cost allocation, you're not familiar with cost-centered accounting or functional expenses, we are required as nonprofit organizations to allocate our expenses in these 3 categories in which they benefit. Okay, and so there are specific IRS rules and statutes and GAAP, general accepted accounting principles, that go into filling this out for nonprofit organizations. So column A is our total expenses, B is our program service expense, C is our management general, otherwise known as admin, and then D is the fundraising expenses. So Charity Navigator, again, is going to refer donors to 25 here on the long form 990. And I always tell nonprofit leaders, this is easy. You've got the space right here, right? If you're still old school, sometimes with me, I just like to print it, right? Just to get my hands on that paper. And so you can easily do the math in the percentages here. So right, are we within those general key guidelines by Charity Navigator or not? And then why not? Were we thinking that we were throughout the year? Hopefully you're doing cost allocation and cost-centered accounting internally within the organization. If you're not, you're heavily relying on your CPA, CMA, accountant, auditor, whomever is filling out this 990 to do this for you. And so that's going to be a little extra time going back and forth questions, right? Whether you're keeping up with your time logs, right? How are you allocating this? How are you justifying this? And what is kind of your method here? So if you did the math real quickly, this organization is well within the general key ratios. So their program is at 79%, management in general is at 12%, and then fundraising is at 9%. So fundraising is a little low there. I would expect to see a footnote on Schedule O to explain that, why when general key ratio is 25 to 35, we're at 9% there. So we'll talk about that also in just a little bit when I go back to page 1 in just a second. All right, so let's take a look then at Schedule A. So Schedule A here, this is the second page of Schedule A, where we have to fill out the last 5 years of income for the organization. So really making sure that you go back. I've seen a lot of discrepancy here. So a lot of organizations, if I go back and I pull off their 2022, these numbers don't reconcile and they don't line up. So making sure that those numbers are carried forward. It may be that they switched maybe CPAs, CPA firms or accountants that are filing their 990. I'm really unsure about that. So make sure that does. And then it's automatic in here with the nice electronic software that we have today, such as Tax 990. It's automatically populated. So you can see here that they do receive more than 33 1/3% public support. So they are good for this organization. And then on Schedule B, everyone, so I'm going to jump to it. If you were noticing as we were scrolling through the 990, in the top right-hand corner underneath the year is open to public inspection. You don't see that here, right? You also see up here public disclosure copy. So what has happened here is probably the board and the C-suite employees have received the 990 with those donor records included in this. But with the public disclosure copy, those are whited out because this is still deemed confidential information by the IRS currently, okay? So we have the contributions because that still lends to our credibility and our reputation of being able, right, to secure this type of funding for the organization. So if you're not familiar with Schedule B, this is donors who have given over $5,000 a year to your nonprofit organization. And we also have to account for in-kind property as well. So we have to talk about the fair market value of what is our method? How do we come about calculating that for our organization? And then last but not least, everybody, we're going to take a look at Schedule O. So I'm going to flip back and forth between some organizations here with Schedule O. So the Schedule O here, in my professional and personal opinion, everybody, it's too wordy. I love a 990 that kind of gets to the point, that KISS principle. Keep it short, sweet, and simple. People have not a lot of time, and we know this in today's society. So you can see here, page 2, part 3, the program service accomplishments. They continue it here, but it's just wording. It's just the programs. It doesn't showcase our accomplishments. It doesn't showcase the impact of this wonderful nonprofit organization. So here is where we're going to make a concerted effort, right? If you want to know more about our programming, if you want to get involved of how to be a volunteer, please reference our annual report, 2023, wearedream.org. And if you don't have that capability of that shortened URL within your website, you can easily do it now with tools and software that are available to you. I wish and I hope that we could put a QR code here. Maybe one day, right, we'll get to that point of putting a QR code on Schedule O if you want more information. But hopefully you can see with that stellar annual report and impact report, they could have used more of that on page 2, part 3, and also here on Schedule O as well. Just by putting that, more information, view, our impact, our statistics, everything. So just a lot here. So I think that we could definitely shorten this a little bit. And then let's take a look at a Schedule O that I really like. Let me pull this up for the Henry County. So on page 6, section B, right, where we talked about the most falsified question on a federal document, here they kind of call it out, right? Not only are they provided with a copy before filing with a pre-recorded video from the accountant walking them through their legal and fiscal responsibilities, not just to the IRS and best practices of nonprofit, but also the Commonwealth of Virginia, the state of Virginia as well. And then we talk about, right, the conflict of interest there. We talk about the executive team compensation policy. And then we also talk about the public disclosure. So when we were on page 6 and we kind of got to the bottom of that, it asked, right, making sure that you keep a copy of your 990 and 1023, 1024, 1026 form open to public inspection. So what we do here is we would love to sit down and discuss our sustainability with you. Let us buy you a copy. Let us buy you, lunch. Come in for a private tour of our facility, some type of call to action here. And then if you noticed on page 1, let's kind of go back to the Dream 990 here real briefly, the number of volunteers, right? And so even on this Henry County one as well, page 1, you have to list the volunteers. They take it a step further here. So the independent sector research study, the volunteer hour is worth $34.79 per hour. So they say our volunteers from page 1, the total number, they donated, you can see here, 10,726.5 hours. That's a grand total of $337,174.94. Fantastic, fantastic. And we talk about our in-kind contributions as well here. So making sure that you have calls to action, and they still have plenty of room here. They could have done a lot more, but they felt that this was sufficient because I believe this was there in researching this organization. This was the first time that they had to file a long form 990. And so I think that they did just a beautiful job here. So on 990s, just kind of calling that out to say, right, on Schedule O, here's the opportunity. Come volunteer with us. Here's the date of our next volunteer orientation. Also, right, if you want to know more about us, help with the sustainability of our organization, because I think I mentioned last week the 3 S's, Melissa's 3 S's, and kind of that apex of what I feel every nonprofit organization should strive to be is strong, successful, sustainable. So if you're really interested in our organization, we invite you, right, to a behind the scenes tour. We invite you to sit down. The reality is, everybody, in addition to finances, the other F word that I love is fundraising. And I talk about this in all the fundraising courses that I teach for nonprofit organizations, that I raise millions of dollars over cups of coffee, because it's that relationship building, because you are actively showing them how you are a great steward of their money. And this is what our 990s should be showcasing for every nonprofit organization out there, because this is how donors and funders and the general public are viewing our 990s today. They're no longer considered just a tax document. And I think this is one of the big disconnects from the accounting field into the nonprofit sector and space, is it's still kind of viewed as that, because corporate America, the tax filing is a private matter between the IRS and that business, and the opposite is true in the nonprofit sector. And I think we've gotten away from that as nonprofit leaders as well. We're spending so much time on our annual report and our impact report when we should be focusing more of that time on making sure that we have a stellar 990 in addition to our stellar annual report, because I feel that the two go hand in hand, particularly when donors and funders are going first to the 990 filing as well. The other thing that I wanted to point out here real quickly, everybody, on page 1, this loss of $11 million for this organization. So if that is a true net operating loss for the organization, we would expect to see a footnote also on Schedule O. Call it out. What happened? If this is a situation where they lost funding, is this a fundraising opportunity or PR tool to say, hey, unfortunately, we lost this funding. We really need the community in which we serve to help us to step up. If you love the programs, project services that we deliver that helps improve the quality of life of those communities in which we serve, those communities in which you live, help us. Contact us for more information on how you can, right, with the annual report, that live living donor wall, how you can become part of that. Would you like to be showcased on that donor wall? And a lot of donors do. They really like to see their name in lights like that, in that what I call that red carpet treatment. So allowing them, right, that legacy, allowing them to be part of the great work that all of you already do that's on today's presentation. So we have, I believe, 10 minutes left. So we're going to kind of switch back to the slides here. Just a couple of shameless little plugs here, everybody. If you have not had the opportunity to watch my TED Talk on fundraising, there is the QR code there. For those of you who would like to follow with some other free courses that I offer through the Small Business Centers and other workshops and classes, you can follow me on the website. And then for those of you who travel, if you like to listen to podcasts, Dr. Patton McDowell, who is a friend of mine out of Charlotte, North Carolina, has a wonderful podcast. I was featured speaker on episode 302, talking about building donor relationships. And I know all of you have found this as a huge, huge surprise here. The 990 came up in that conversation as well, everyone. And then I wanted to kind of end with before we get to Q&A, hopefully there's a lot of questions today about this. I wanted to provide you with my email address and phone number. I would love to hear from you if you have follow-up questions outside of this as well. But yeah, let's take a look at some questions. Oh, fantastic. All right, let's see. So an immediate family member of a board of directors, member 501c3 public charity, is the president of a community college foundation. Can the public charity make grants, donations to the community college foundation? Is a disclosure required? Yes, and so we get into a little bit here also, Teresa, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is the conflict of interest as well. So if make grants, donations to the community college, so the immediate family of the public charity, so that would need to be referenced in both sets of minutes that president abstained from voting, and there should be a memo of understanding contracts really explicitly calling out that's I have a minor in business law, everybody. I'm not a practicing attorney. So I would definitely refer to an attorney on this just to make sure, because as you can tell, I'm a stickler for dotting the I's and crossing T's. So you want to make sure that you have this documented, because conflict of interest is taken very seriously. In this country, we saw this effective October of 2016 with the revision of the 1023, 1024, 1026 forms of an application for a nonprofit organization. You now have to submit your conflict of interest plus your acknowledgement statement. That is taken very seriously. Even with federal grants and most private foundations now, they require to see the conflict of interest, and that conflict of interest has to be signed yearly by the board of directors. And everybody, I recommend continuous learning for your board, because it's one thing to sign a conflict of interest. It's another thing to really understand what is a conflict of interest. So what are some samples? What are some examples that can get our organization into some serious hot water or serious trouble? And we don't want that. Great question. Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, what percentage of long form 990s are audited by the IRS, and do they ever reject them? Yes, they do reject them. Oh, I love this question, Frank. Thank you so much. And what we're finding right now is this is becoming more and more prevalent. And the reason for that is with the change, and Morgan, you might have to chime in on this one. I think it was 2018 is when we saw the electronic filing. I think that was the deadline. I think it started in 2016, and 2018 was the final that you have to now submit all 990s electronically. So now with this integrated software and all 990s coming in, it is easier to flag stuff. So like part 2, page 2, I keep getting that backwards today, everybody, I apologize. Page 2, part 3, has their program service accomplishments changed? We cannot differ very far from our mission statement, everybody. So they're looking at that. They're also looking at, on page 6, question 4, if you mark that every single year, yes, we've changed our articles, our governing documents, our bylaws, they're going to be like, what are they doing? I mean, this is clearly not a well-governed organization. What is happening here? So we're seeing this more and more. And what the IRS is doing is kind of a hybrid audit. So you kind of get a letter via email if there's an email attached to the electronic software that's submitting your 990, and or they're going to find you through the website. They're going to send a letter via the mail because they still use snail mail. And they're going to request a lot more information. So that's kind of a questionnaire that's filled out. You have to send it back. There's a deadline that's due. So absolutely, we're seeing a lot more of that because of the electronic filing. Great question. Yes. Oh, Selena, thank you for coming today. I hope this was helpful. Thank you. Yes. Oh, fantastic. Oh, Candace, wonderful. I love that. Yes, claim your organization. And you'll get a lot more funds from that. Definitely. Oh, Morgan, did I answer that question correctly?
With the IRS.
Yes. Wasn't it
so
2018?
2019 and the full year
2019.
2020 is when it started. Yeah, but you were really close.
Oh,
Awesome.
so close.
I know. Gosh, Melissa, thank you so much again. This was just really informational. We got a lot out of this. And I hope everybody else found this session valuable as well. We do have another webinar next week with a new host, Tracy Poe. She's gonna her webinar is called Inspire, Pitch, Fund, Public Speaking Tips for Nonprofits. So that'll be interesting. It'll teach us how to do those speaking tips and more for nonprofits. But I thank everybody for being here today. And Melissa, thank you so much for presenting this to us.
Yes. Thanks, everyone.
All right.